You'd like to stand up here? I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Leary. He'll be making a short statement, then he'll take questions from members of the press. How long would you like to run, sir? 20 minutes?
As long as we feel like going.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just let you start, and you guys ask the questions.
Well, I'm very happy to be at Ball State. I had a wonderful drive up from the airport, and the reception I've had here from the student coordinating committee and been very hospitable. I'm a little embarrassed to be giving a press conference before the World Series game, so that many of the things that you want to know about, I will be talking about and I'll be demonstrating on the screen tonight. I feel like the manager or the player just ready to go on the field. Basically, the title of my performance is How to Operate Your Brain. I have a multimedia presentation which uses all of the craft and wizardry and brain-scrambling effects of modern commercial television to get you to believe in the product. And the product or the message that I'm trying to convey is, number one, think for yourself and question authority. I have a commercial about Socrates, whose group is the first Western group to have presented this position, which of course is a very anti-establishment position, to encourage people, particularly young people, to think for themselves and question authority. I give a very powerful commercial attempting to describe and program your minds with the message of Marshall McLuhan, who said the media is the message. I have been lucky enough to have lived in the most exciting time, I think, in human history. I was born in 1920. I was the first generation of people growing up during that vulnerable period of childhood from, say, 3 to 10. The first generation of human beings that had radio in the home. And I belong to the radio generation. And I'm using McLuhan here. The radio generation of people that grew up in the 20s and 30s produced the New Deal. Of course, Hitler was the first person to understand how to use radio. Churchill did, Mussolini did, Roosevelt did. In everything that I do, there's a strong emphasis on the counterculture, because you can really judge a culture by its counterculture. And if there's no counterculture, obviously you have a very totalitarian, there is one, but we don't get to hear about it. The counterculture of the 1920s was, of course, the jazz flapper age, and you can't believe how shocking that was to my mother and to my grandmother to have young men and young women wiggling and dancing. Listening, by the way, for the first time, white people could listen to black music. There's no way that my family, living in a small town in Massachusetts, they never met a Negro, so that was the first media experience I had. And the counterculture, of course, was a very powerful counterculture. Then 1950s television, which produced the Eisenhower. Eisenhower, boy, did that guy know how to use television. And the counterculture from the television age, of course, was in the 1950s with the beatniks. So I describe honor them and demonstrate the kind of music that came. It was rhythm and blues, black music. Then, pardon? Okay. What I'm doing now is trying to summarize what I'm going to be doing tonight. swing came along in that generation, and again, it was a interracial, new music, new culture. The 60s, of course, produced the Johnson, Nixon, mainstream culture, but a very powerful counterculture called hippies. The new music, of course, was rock and roll. Every generation has had an illegal drug. It just seems to go along with the changing of the new generation. The illegal drug in the 20s was, of course, alcohol. The illegal drug that was used by the beatniks was marijuana. In the 60s, it was psychedelic drugs. And then in 1980, a new generation emerged, which, see, the grown-ups have never been able to deal with any generation. We don't have a word for the people that are under the age of 30. One thing is a constant, though. There have been 4 generations, and every generation said the same thing: don't trust anyone over 30. And every generation is shocked by the new ones. The big band people didn't understand rock and roll, and for that matter, the beatniks, all of whom I knew very well, never really liked rock and roll. Jack Kerouac hated hippies and that sort of thing. The point I'm making here is that every new generation is defined by a media and a new music, and usually there's a new illegal drug. The new generation, those grew up in the 80s and who are under the age of 30 are really different. They are really different. They grew up in the years 3 to 10, learning how to use an entirely new media, digital, the Nintendo generation. While the baby boom mothers and fathers were listening to the Rolling Stones, the kids were in the playroom doing Nintendo or Sega Genesis, and then, of course, personal computing and Macintosh. So I'm going to try to summarize this history. I think it's a very exciting time. Information, intelligence has been accelerating. The curve goes upward. And the basic aim, as I said, is to encourage and empower people to think for themselves, which means you have to learn the new media, and you have to have contacts with younger people who will teach you what's going on in the new generation. My message describing the 4 generations is basically one of reconciliation and I think American pride, that America has in just 70 years produced 4 very different media cultures which have changed the world. I don't lecture in the standard professorial sense. I tend to vocalize, reacting with the audience to what's going on the screen and in the sound. And hopefully we'll have the audio-video thing working. Then the most interesting part of my visits is always the interaction afterwards. I will invite the audience, as I now invite you, to ask questions, question authority. I have to warn you, I have no answers. I have suggestions and points of view, perspectives, outlooks, which represent how I see things. And after that long and rambling summary, I invite you to ask me questions. Yes, sir. Well, where are you from?
My name's Dave Pennicuff. I work at the Evening Press.
Okay, that's the paper in town? Okay, the press, good.
Wanted to ask you about technology today, and has technology to some degree taken the place of recreational drugs, the same role recreational drugs may have had in the 60s and early 70s for kids?
This is a very intelligent and logical question, comes up all the time. they go together, because what illegal drugs do is they allow the individual to change your brain, and the marijuana 50s kind of went along with that laid-back hipster attitude of William Burroughs and Ginsberg. Yes, it's not either or. There are probably more people, younger people, percentage-wise, using illegal drugs now as there were in the 60s and in the 50s. Probably not as many as in the 20s, but and they go together, because what we're talking about is, see, what the new media does, and what the new music does, it brings people together of that generation. So at Woodstock you had 500,000 people reacting to the music of rock and rollers and Jimi Hendrix. So I would say the drugs of the period tend to harmonize and help express the media. I said that wrong. The media allows people to express what they are experiencing by using mind-altering drugs. I'm in no way discouraging people from using illegal drugs. I don't advocate this, because right now, since the government has criminalized drugs, there's no way of knowing what kind of drugs you're going to get. And I certainly do not advocate anyone running out and buying LSD from someone in a trench coat. There is a new generation of drugs that the new generation are using. They tend to be called designer drugs. They're used at raves, XTC, 2CB, Eve, Atom, stuff like that. They are not illegal yet, because it always takes the government about 10 or 15 years to catch up. See, alcohol was illegal in the 20s. They made marijuana illegal sometime after prohibition of alcohol was eliminated. And the new drugs, which are used by many young people, are not yet illegal, because the government doesn't know much about it. But I don't in any way advocate the use of drugs unless you know exactly what you're doing, and these brain change substances must be used with care and caution and knowledge. That is a company. It's a corporate name, but it doesn't really mean much. I'm working with about 6 or 7 groups of people under the age of 30. We're developing Futique as an umbrella name. Each of these groups of young people I work with have their own name. For example, the audiovisual stuff you'll see and hear tonight and done by a group of 3 young people called Retinal Logic. I'm not a corporate person, and we don't have offices. It's all done face-to-face or by modem. What I'm going to do in the third quarter, and you'll see that tonight if you come, but everything that I do with media and to communicate their thoughts in a more effective way. Specifically now, we're developing programs. The software is there, the hardware is there, the software is coming. We can communicate in multimedia digital patterns rather than words, because words are very limited to the linguistic group and the geographically in the class. By the way, see, to allow individuals to process information, store information on disks, communicate information on screens, that each 6 months, the memory power of these programs is tripled or tenfold. The cost comes down at least half, and they're smaller.
Yes, I'm Scott Miley from Indianapolis at Indianapolis Star newspaper.
Okay. What's your name?
Scott Miley.
Hi, Scott.
You've also in the past talked about life extension.
Yes.
I was wondering what you've done personally in that end.
The question has to do with my interest in life extension. I've been, any human being with more than 2 fingers of forehead certainly is interested in extending their life. And there's been an enormous amount of research done in the last 4 or 5 years in rejuvenation, in control of diet. The focus on extending your own lifespan is, I think, apparent to most literate Americans. I have made arrangements to have my brain put in a brain bank, this metal bracelet here. If anything happens to me, the doctors will see that and they'll call a number, collect, and they will. The idea is I'm going to have my brain put in a brain bank. Now we have liver banks and kidney banks and heart banks, and believe me, the brain is a lot easier to preserve because the brain has no muscles and no plumbing functions. I'm not doing this out of any desperate desire to extend my life. I think I've lived the most interesting life any of us ever lived because I was lucky enough to be at the time when more was happening, and I hung out with the people that could teach me most. But yes, the field of life extension, rejuvenation, is when you get issues like Dr. Kevorkian, the ability of the individual to make that choice as to when you want to deanimate. Yeah, that's a hot issue now. It's been on the ballot several times in West Coast states, and I'm still very interested in it.
Just the plans to freezing your brain. What happens to it then? What do you expect to happen?
Well, see, right now, this Alcor group has, I think, 40 people whose bodies or brains are frozen, and they will be reanimated if and when science gets to the point where, through nanotechnology, they'll be able to restore your body, if you have your body banked, or clone you so that you can. Yeah, the real problem is how to preserve consciousness, or preserve your personality, or preserve what we might call the soul. And I have developed computer programs to allow you to store your everything you'd need to know if you were to be reanimated. I have over 1,000 cardboard boxes with 2 people working full time to organize so that I can tell exactly what the dinner check was September 17th, 1972, and usually I scribble with whom. This helps both for taxes, but it will allow me to construct through these files as much as anyone, more than anyone would want to know about my memory. But and I'm doing this not again because the chances of my coming back, be reanimated, probably 1 in 100,000. Of course, the other choices are to be barbecued, they call that cremation, or eaten by the worms, and you have no chance of coming back unless you believe in a all-powerful God in heaven. So that, as you probably know or would logically assume, the usual cast of characters are totally opposed to reanimation or to conscious self-deliverance by the Kevorkian, because religions and political organizations and medical associations and healthcare associations don't want the individual making these choices. They'd much rather keep you alive on tubes, $10,000 a month, whatever it is, than having you the choice of backing yourself and coming back. I'm not actively involved in this, but I'm very closely connected and in continual touch with maybe 10 groups of researchers in this country and in other countries that were working on this challenge. I'm not the leader of anything. I've never been the leader of everything. I don't lead. I'm a cheerleader at best. But the Futurist movement is an enormously wide-spanning concept. I suggest you go to the library and look up Futurism. You'll find a large stack of magazines and organizations that are interested in anticipating and planning and even designing futures. That's enough, isn't it? I think I've given you more than you need to know about what I'm going to do tonight, and I hope some of you will come. And as I say, the most interesting part of these, I'll say one final thing. I've been doing a lot of lecturing in the last 2 or 3 months at colleges and at Futurist organizations, and I must tell you that I feel tangibly a resurgence of optimism and of hope and of intelligent, skeptical self-confidence in young people today. This is a dangerous prediction to make, but I got nothing to lose. I predict that when I come on stage tonight, there will be a tremendous wave of enthusiasm. Now, that's not for me. I don't take it personally. I think I do represent, of course, most college kids don't even know who I am, but they know someone that does. And I think for many young people, I represent basically the humanist position. Think for yourself, and I am a very battle-scarred veteran of dissent. And I think you will be interested in the audience reaction, perhaps more than even what I present. And I find that it's very encouraging at this time when everything is collapsing and faith in government is decreasing, not only here but in all the countries in the world, that a new generation is coming along who, in their own quiet way, are developing self-confidence, working in small groups to manage their lives more creatively. I'm happy to be here, and I hope I'll see you all tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Dr. Leary will be at 7 o'clock tonight in Emmonsville. See you then. If anybody has any questions or needs any additional information, Dr. Leary, just see me. I've got these still, and thanks to him. I appreciate that.